Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Horn Call podcast. My name is James Bolden, the publications editor for the International Horn Society and the host of the Horn Call podcast. My esteemed guest today is Professor Michelle Stebleton from Florida State University, and I am so excited to get into this conversation with her. She has just a wealth of experience as a performer, a teacher, an editor, and has a long history of service to the International Horn Society. It was really, really great to sit down and chat with Professor Stebleton and talk about her path to becoming a college professor, all of the different and varied activities she's been involved with, and then kind of tying it up at the end and bringing it all back to the International Horn Society. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Michelle Stebleton. Thanks so much for talking with me today. There's so many things we could talk about, but maybe we could talk about, like, what if we start out by maybe talking about your early inspirations, musical and otherwise, and kind of what led you down this path to where you are now, being a extremely active performer and just a widely known pedagogue, and you're composing now. I mean, all of these things. Could you talk a little bit about those early days and how you got your start?
Sure. Well, it- gosh, where to begin? I wanted to play the flute, and my mother said no because I had stopped practicing piano, and she said that I was a Type A personality and would want to be first chair, and with my work ethic, that wasn't going to happen. So I had to play any other instrument for a year and prove to her I would practice. And my brother was by choice a horn player, 2 years older. And he said, play the horn, I can help you, and you can get good without practicing. So it started out as a scam. And my teachers, I had two teachers early on, Robert Ralston and Dottie Stale, and they were truly inspirational. They were pillars of the community. We had a thriving music community in a small town. I grew up in Midland, Michigan. And so we had our own orchestra. We did community theater. They brought in major guest artists. We did Viennese waltz evenings and Italian aria nights. And I got to play in all of those settings starting in the 8th grade.
Wow.
So I think just being in that environment was inspirational. I had some great training along the way. But Doug Campbell, I studied with for 2 years in high school. He was at Michigan State at the time. He taught me so much that kicked in when I was in my 20s. All of the synapses fired in my 20s, and I kept having these moments in the practice room. Oh, that's what he was talking about. That's what he meant. So I really did get a lot out of all of the teaching that I had growing up.
Did you know right away that this was, hey, this is something I want to pursue at a very high level and maybe do as a career? Or did that take was there a progression towards that kind of a decision?
I had a minimal, vague understanding of what it was to be a musician. My mother was a pianist, organist, accompanist, teacher, and that wasn't what I wanted to do, in the sense that I didn't play piano. I didn't want to continue playing piano, but I knew from the age of 10 that I wanted to be, or maybe 11, that I wanted to be a musician for a living. I just didn't really know what that looked like. But I identified with playing. I identified with music. I always have had some trouble with academic classes that required memorization. I don't memorize words very well. And I think I connected well with music. So it was just a natural place for me to land. In fact, the idea that I wanted to play flute, at the end of the first year of horn, my mother said, yes, you are allowed to play flute now. So I took it for the summer. Well, we started it in the summer. I took it for the summer. And at the end of the summer, she said, which instrument do you want to play, flute or horn? And I said, well, I'd like a year to decide. And she said, no, you have to decide now, one instrument. And my rationale for staying with the horn was that I liked the teacher, and I was a year behind on the flute, and I would never catch up in the profession because I wanted to be a professional. That was at age 11.
Interesting. And
So,
you got into the junior high band in high school and that sort of thing. What were those, it doesn't necessarily matter what kind of band program people come from. There are great musicians that come from very small programs, great musicians that come from large ones. But what was that like, in junior and high school going through the band program where you grew up?
well, I was, as a seventh grader, put in the eighth and ninth grade band.
Mm-hmm.
That was musically more rewarding, but it meant that lunchtime I was by myself because I wasn't with my peers.
Uh,
And, at that age group, that's a whole thing.
mm-hmm.
And then in high school, band was fine, but I was already playing in the local symphony and the pit orchestras and the symphony next door. I was having experiences with adult semi-professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't as happy in my band, but I'm hoping that I didn't make my unhappiness known, other than I wanted to get out of the marching band.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't march competitions, but we did march all the games.
Mm-hmm.
And at one of the games, I was on Bellfront Mellophone.
Mm-hmm.
One of the games, somebody stopped, and I walked straight into the person in front of me
Oh
with my hand
no.
in my face. Yeah, and I busted my lip in several places. My teeth were loose. There was some question as to whether or not I would lose them. And I said, I don't want to play in the marching band anymore. I know that this is what I want to do for a career. Marching
Mm-hmm.
band is not important to me. So I had that conversation with the band director, and he said, but you're my only horn next year. I need you.
Uh,
I said, I do not want to play in the marching band. I will not play in band if it comes to it. And he
mm-hmm.
said, then you can't play in the local symphony and pit orchestras because they had a contract that you couldn't do one without the other.
Oh.
I said, that's fine. I'll get more experience when I go to college. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to play marching band. That was my number one goal.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I'll think about it. And in the 6 weeks that he thought about it, I applied to, was accepted to, and got scholarship for going to Interlochen Arts Academy.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up there for my senior year.
Okay.
And really, the only reason I thought about it was because I was trying to get out of marching band. So I didn't have a problem with concert band. It was
Uh-huh.
so I went to Interlochen and then went on to University of Michigan. So yeah,
Who was teaching at Interlochen at the time?
John Jacobson, who had
Okay.
studied with Louis Stout. So I had
Okay.
advanced training on some of Louis Stout's techniques, which made it an easier transition when I went to study with Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Stout.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Louis Stout is someone I think, and I've certainly heard of, though I just didn't have any experience. I never got to, see him teach in a master class or anything like that. Could you share with us a little bit about what that was like studying with him? He's just a renowned teacher. He's got all those, I've certainly seen the warm ups and the packet that, all of that stuff.
Well, he was a very loving and very grumpy man. He was both. He taught through repertoire. You were responsible for learning the notes, learning the style, learning the phrasing, and then his job was just to put the finishing touches on. And he went through, I don't know, I can't speak for the other students, but in my lessons, every single week I brought in new material,
Mm-hmm.
the entire lesson. And so I went through maybe 65 solos and I don't know, 6 excerpt books and parts and pieces of maybe 20 etude books. He would rotate solos, etudes, and excerpts. So each week you had to bring in a lesson's worth of either solos, etudes, or excerpts.
Mm-hmm.
He was really big on his fingering system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I think is most misunderstood about his teaching, is that he enforced the B flat horn, that you had to play all on the B flat side. And most of the students in Michigan started on F horn, so we were all comfortable with F horn, but not everybody knew their B flat side through the mid range, etc. So his mission was to make sure that you could play B flat side everywhere on the horn, then start mixing up the fingerings for the best use for that particular passage. And then in slurs, that you had valve slurs through passages instead of lip slurs, or half and half, that there wouldn't be the one isolated lip slur. So most of the students got through learning the B flat side, but then they never learned to mix and mingle between the two sides.
Okay. How
So that
interesting.
was really
Yeah.
his ultimate goal, was that
Yeah.
you figure out what's best for a particular passage.
Was that something unique to his teaching, or did he mention maybe getting that idea or that concept, picking it up from other people? Maybe like I know in Europe they play it, their horns stand in B flat. In a lot of cases they just stay in B flat.
Yeah, I think in Europe they stay more just on the B flat side, which is
Mm-hmm.
what Stout students ended up doing.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't talk about where that came from. I don't know if it was from his experience or from a teacher
Mm-hmm.
somewhere along the way, but he didn't intend for us to play solely on the B flat side,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're on a descant horn or a single B
Right.
flat, which he was one of the early people using descants and single B flats.
Mm-hmm.
At the time that I was studying, people called them cheater horns, the descant. It was not popular, and triples existed, but I think through my college career, I had only seen one triple horn, and that
Mm-hmm.
was Mayor Bones.
And they're pretty heavy at the time. I mean, they've the technology and the materials they're using have gotten so much more advanced.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you did a master's and a bachelor's and a master's at Michigan, and then did you study with Lowell Greer at Michigan or privately or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Louis and I graduated together. He retired when I graduated from my senior year.
Uh-huh.
And I was going to apply to Cincinnati to study with Lowell, but then Lowell got the job at Michigan. So very conveniently for me, I got to stay in my apartment and just hang out in Ann Arbor for another year. And I just did a 1 year master's
Mm-hmm.
and studied with Lowell during that time. And
Was that a lot of natural horn or not?
we ended up doing a lot of natural
Mm-hmm.
horn. I mean, that's obviously a wise choice considering who I was studying with.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually injured during my master's degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I had about 6 weeks where I wasn't playing because I couldn't even hold up a natural horn.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started doing natural horn. I took some trompe de chasse lessons with him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I learned the E flat alto horn sonata on alto horn because it was right-handed.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I went farther with the natural horn studies, which I had started with Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that quite a bit. And then for the rest of my degree, I finished out my ensemble requirements on a backwards horn,
Okay.
right-handed, left-handed, a backwards horn, valves on the right hand.
How
That was a
interesting.
little
Yeah.
awkward.
So, I would assume, that your major teachers, Louis Stout and Lowell Greer, were big influences and inspirations on you. But at the time, were there other people that you looked to, whether they were horn players or not, that were sort of, mentors or role models in terms of where you wanted to take your career and the kinds of things you wanted to do?
Well, at the time, I didn't know that this was where my career was going to go.
Okay.
Um, I think growing up, my first recordings, we had records, and I had records of Dennis Brain, Barry Tuckwell, Herman Bauman, and then my teacher smuggled a recording out of East Germany of Peter Dam, and
Mm-hmm.
he became my hero. I think probably I most wanted to sound like Herman Bauman.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to my first international horn conferences at age 14,
Mm.
and I got to experience all of that. And that was at that conference, Freudis Beckery was
Mm-hmm.
one of the guest artists, and she was very inspirational for me in many ways. And I didn't make the connection that she might have been a little more inspirational than the others because she was a woman.
Mm.
It was such a male dominated field. And maybe because I had a woman teacher as a young child and she played first horn with me in the pit and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the orchestras, it didn't occur to me that maybe there was that connection because of the gender.
Mm-hmm.
But Freudis is such an inspirational human being and teacher and player.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, all of the guest artists were phenomenal in their own ways.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And so was there, I imagine, did you have work lined up right away after your master's degree? Did you do the audition circuit? I'm always interested with people about, what series of coincidence or fate, whatever you want to call it, leads you to, a certain path. And, what led you down towards becoming a full-time, college professor, basically one of the largest colleges of music around.
Well, the story of how I decided that I wanted to go into teaching is a little different from the story of how I got to FSU. But how I got into teaching, my original goal as a child was I wanted to be a soloist.
Hmm.
And it was John Jacobson at Interlochen who said, yeah, that's not really a job. Uh, you have to be principal horn in an orchestra and then you can play solos. So your goal is to be principal horn in an orchestra.
Hmm.
So I went to college thinking that was the goal. But Lowell, by my master's, Lowell realized that I wasn't practicing excerpts and taking auditions as seriously as I needed to. And he sat me down and he said, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hmm.
And I did the crying, tearful, I don't know.
Hmm.
And he said, well, what are the things that you like to do? And I said, well, I like to play solos. And
Hmm.
I said, I love chamber music, absolutely adore chamber music. And I like playing in the orchestra, but maybe not all day long every day. But
Hmm.
I do like that. And I was in my first year teaching. I'd never taught until, well, I taught a couple of lessons when I was in high school, and I think that scarred me. Um, for my master's, I was the teaching assistant. So I'd started teaching and I had a couple of middle school students at one of the neighboring schools. And I said, well, I'm enjoying this teaching thing. It's brand new, but
Hmm.
I'm enjoying it. And by the way, I like editing my friends' papers before they turn them in.
Hmm.
I'm really big on grammar and punctuation. And he said, you've just described college teaching.
Hmm.
And I don't know why it had never occurred to me that that was a job option. But that was the moment that it clicked. So my first job was I was injured and I wasn't taking auditions. I had nothing on my plate. I
Hmm.
had moved out of my apartment because Ann Arbor is very expensive. And in the summer, I was renting a room in a sorority house. I went to New Mexico to teach summer camp. And while I was there, I got a phone call. Oh, I guess it was went before I went to summer camp, I had gotten a phone call. We need a teaching assistant in Oxford, Mississippi
Hmm.
for horn because their person had just gotten a job. So I drove down to Mississippi on my way from Michigan to New Mexico, and I signed the papers and enrolled as a theory doctoral student that I would be the horn teacher.
Hmm.
I found an apartment, went out to teach summer camp. While I was there, I got a phone call from a conductor I had worked with in summer music festivals who was kind of Midland based and from my
Hmm.
hometown. He said, I just became the conductor of the Midland-Odessa Symphony, and the first horn player just got another job. I need a first horn. It's
Oh,
not even
wow.
an extra. Do you need a job? I said, well, let me see if I can get out of this other thing.
Hmm.
And there was another student who hadn't worked out her future with the right college, and she was interested. So Ole Miss let me back out of the contract.
Hmm.
The apartment let me back out of the apartment. I drove from New Mexico to Midland, Texas, and
Hmm.
rented an apartment down there and went back to Michigan and collected my belongings and moved 1,800 miles to my first job in Midland-Odessa. So I was in that orchestra and then Lone Star Brass Quintet and taught a lot of little kids,
Hmm.
which is what the job is. And so now the part about how I got to FSU, I knew I wanted to look for teaching jobs, but I didn't have a doctorate. And
Hmm.
so my life plan was 3 years in Midland and then go do my doctorate and then apply for jobs.
Hmm.
But the trumpet teacher at FSU asked one of his former students, do you know of any horn players who would be good for an assistant professor position
Hmm.
here? They were creating a new position. And we're looking for somebody with either associate. They opened it up for associate and assistant. So,
Hmm.
do you know anyone who would fit that bill? And he said, well, there's this girl from my wife's hometown, and I've heard her play many times in church or in recitals, in contests, because they would always be visiting when those things happened. They would
Okay.
just visiting their parents. Um, so, and they went to the same church as our family. So he had heard me play, and I just won some prizes at the American Horn Competition. And there's a spread in the horn call, which he'd happened to read.
Hmm.
So he recommended me. They got my phone number, and the trumpet teacher called me and invited me to apply. I was told flat out by a male friend of mine that I was a token female applicant and that I had absolutely no chance of getting the job.
Hmm.
So I applied anyway, and I didn't get the job in the first round. They auditioned for associate level position and didn't settle on contracts with whomever they chose.
Mm-hmm.
Then they decided to make it a 1 year and looked for somebody who would be willing to come for a year. And at that point, my name came up in part because of my connection through the band directors. Yeah, so there's a little more to the story, but a lot of it seemed sort of fate-like, that there were a lot of moving parts of former parts of my life interacting to get me the position.
Well, yeah, and yeah, isn't that interesting though? I mean, how, things like that work out the way they do, but I mean, I can't imagine you being anywhere else. And, the impact that you've had on the musical community and the horn community is incredible. So, I mean, I think you're where you're supposed to be.
Thank you. Thank you.
But,
Yeah, it was a long haul. I started in a 1 year position and then had to re-audition for the job.
oh,
And then
yeah,
of course
yeah,
comes the tenure process and all of that. So
sure. Yeah. Um, So could we step back a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of, you mentioned you liked things other than orchestral playing, and that's one of the great things about university type careers is they allow you a certain amount of flexibility and that sort of thing. But then on the other side of it is you have to balance all those things. You don't just have one job that you go and do day in and day out. So I imagine over the years you've learned some techniques and tricks and tips for balancing a busy teaching and performing career. Is there anything that you would, advice you'd give to new people in that role where it's like, okay, I want to keep playing and be the best player I can be, but then I also have these students that I feel in part responsible for, and then balancing all of those things.
I don't think that I'm the right person to talk to about balance. It's very fortunate for my work-life balance that I don't have a family. I have no idea how people with a family do it. The advice I was given when I came into this job from somebody outside of FSU
Hmm.
was, if you want to play well, playing has to be your hobby.
Hmm.
That you have to do that as your activity for fun.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you will never play well while you're doing this job.
Hmm.
And that is true. That is absolutely true. Someone else, a year or two in, I asked somebody, I don't want to out the person, but it was somebody who was doing everything and
Hmm.
really well respected in the horn world and had a lot of balls in the air.
Hmm.
And I said, how do you do it? And the answer was, tell you the secret, you don't do anything well. And some days, some days I feel like I have home runs. We have a light bulb moment in a lesson and
Hmm.
it's great. Or maybe I have a good concert and feel good about it. And then there are a lot of days that truthfully, I feel like nothing is being done well. I don't have enough time and attention to give to everything. I just do the best I can.
Hmm. I think that's everybody to some extent, though. I mean, we're all just doing the best we can at any one moment. But I think that's from someone, as I said, who's as renowned as you are and has got this career that you have, and lots and lots of successful students out there. I think that's good for new people to hear because it is very overwhelming at first. And that feeling of, do I even belong here? Is this, the imposter syndrome thing? I think I can imagine it being encouraging for people that are just starting out to know that, like, okay, you can do this, and maybe that feeling doesn't ever go away completely, but as you get more experience, I think you probably become more used to making things work however they need to just get the job done.
Yeah, I find that I'm a more efficient practicer than I used to be.
Hmm.
Being a good sight reader helps you to learn your music faster.
Hmm.
Um, let's see, what else? If you're traveling, using that time while you're traveling to listen to your program that's coming up. So
Hmm.
like, I have Mahler 6 and Mahler 3 on my playlist right now
Hmm.
because they're coming up. So finding efficient ways to do your job,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. That's very good advice. Um, so in terms of, I know when I first started teaching, I basically was like a carbon copy of the people I'd studied with because you don't really have any choice. You can only say the things that you know to say, and you try things that you know to try. But then as you become more your own teacher, you come up with your own ways of talking about things, and then there's still that core of the people that you studied with, which is nice to have, but then you have your own ideas and you develop your own things. Could you talk a little bit about that, how you kind of came into your own as being your own teacher over those years? And if there's, again, we can talk about it in like a general way, if there's trends in horn pedagogy that you've noticed over the years that you've either adopted yourself or that you've seen happen in the field. I think that might be really interesting for people to hear about.
Well, my lessons with Louis Stout were repertoire based,
Mm-hmm.
lots and lots of rep. And some of my early students, when I've seen them years later, they've reminded me, yeah, you once assigned me 12 etudes in 1 week. Well, that was what I did
Mm-hmm.
for my teacher. So that didn't seem out of bounds at the time. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that the students that I have to meet them where they are to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably I should for every single student, although I have a little bit of a philosophy that if they can't do the minimum that I set forth, then it's not the right field for them.
Mm-hmm. What do you do much playing in lessons these days? I think early on it's tempting as a new teacher to just, well, let me just play it for you so you can hear how it goes. And then, different teachers have different philosophies about that.
Yeah, I used to play more in lessons, I think, than I
Mm-hmm.
do. Louis Stout played every note in your lesson with you. That was how
Wow.
that was how he stayed in shape.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tempting sometimes to play in lessons because you need extra practice time.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized at some point that I needed to play in lessons only when it was helpful to the student.
Mm-hmm.
So I do play in lessons some. Some days I don't because I have a concert or hard rehearsal or haven't. Well, no, on the days I haven't warmed up, I don't use that as an excuse. I pull out my horn, and invariably those days, the first lesson, first excerpt is Brandenburg Beethoven 7, short call. It's one of those, guaranteed, or Tchaik 5 or something. Some
Mm-hmm.
people want to play unwarmed up, but I do play in lessons, some. I play less than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I changed in my teaching about 10 years in, I had a junior who was a very fine player playing in the top band,
Mm-hmm.
and he brought in the botte en forêt.
Mm-hmm.
We got to the hand stop part, and he looked at me and he said, "How do I hand stop?"
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, how can you be in the top band and not know how to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to, we worked on it, obviously, but I had to ask myself, was it his fault for not telling me that he didn't know how to do it? Or was it my fault for not assessing where he was and teaching what he needed?
Mm.
So, with as many students as I have, I don't have really, I feel the time in lessons to assess exactly what training everyone has had.
Right.
So I now have a system where in the freshman year, essentially they have a checklist
Mm-hmm.
that we go through hand stopping and bass clef and transposition, high registered, low registered, double tonguing, triple tonguing, single
Mm-hmm.
tonguing, lip trills. It's all laid out. And so their etudes are kind of programmatic, that they've been laid out for them. Their
Mm-hmm.
solos are individually assigned based on where they're at and what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the etudes, I give them free range within a book. Like you must play something from Maxime Alphonse book 1,
Mm-hmm.
but they get to choose which etude. And
Oh,
they can,
I like that idea. Yeah.
yeah. So it's somewhat prescribed and somewhat not, and scales, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that whole system, then it's set up in a system of units where once they've completed everything in a unit, they get the grade attached in the next grade. So 2
Mm-hmm.
units, they get a D, 3 a C, 4 a B, 5 an A.
Mm-hmm.
So they should know where their grade is at any time. But
Mm-hmm.
also it means that they can't skip G sharp harmonic minor and still pass their lessons for a year.
Right.
So it makes it a little easier for me to police the students who don't want to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
The students who do want to do the work, if they can breeze through it, then the reward is they either don't have to take their ending lessons at the end of the semester, or they can bring in whatever material they want to study.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's sort of front loaded in that if you do the work and get it passed off, then you've got some credit in the bank, so to
Right.
speak.
Right. If you want to play Star Wars or Mahler or another movement of Strauss one, whatever, you're in charge. You bring it in.
Oh, I like that. So did that kind of, and that's excellent, and that's very organized and thorough. Did that come easily to you implementing that system, or was it a bit of a process just sort of figuring out like the best way you wanted to do it?
It was a bit of a process. I
Mm-hmm.
started with a points reward system
Mm-hmm.
that our tuba teacher, my colleague Paul Ebers, was using,
Mm-hmm.
where you could earn X number of points toward your final score, and these scores equal these grades. And
Okay.
I started out that way, but I realized that in my teaching, I like to deviate and talk about the technique behind something. Let's
Mm-hmm.
work on your sound, and we forget about whatever the etude was that they brought in
Mm-hmm.
that was irrelevant. Now it's about whatever we discovered in the etude.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point system didn't really work for me.
Mm-hmm.
The checkoff system, there's still that deviation, but for instance, we go through the first 10 Bordoni etudes in
Mm-hmm.
the Bordoni Rochu book. And if they can't play the first one really well, because they don't read bass clef and they don't play well in the low register, we
Mm-hmm.
talk about the things and, work with them on doing what they need to do. And then I say, okay, you gave it your best effort. I'm going to check it off, but we need to see this improvement for the next etude. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the checking off process becomes more about what they've learned and less about what they actually achieved.
I like that.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. No, it, and that is such a balance. You certainly for students who are motivated and already playing at a high level, you can sort of push a little bit and expect like just the highest standards, and that's good for them. But then if a student is struggling with something, you don't necessarily want to complicate the issue and say, has to be this, or you just simply don't pass. That's a tricky, line to walk, I imagine.
Yeah, and we've taken some students out of the units where, oh, we have this fundamental thing that we need to do. Let's
Mm-hmm.
take it out of the system, or let's take off one of the units and replace it with working on tone
Mm-hmm.
or embouchure change
Mm-hmm.
or working on articulation or something like a big project. But what I found with maybe, I'm guessing at the percentage, 80% of my students
Mm-hmm.
in the freshman year, they're not ready to do the detailed, focused work of perfecting one little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach macro to micro.
Mm-hmm.
So getting them to read more notes, more rhythms, more styles, more of the things like transposition and bass clef and hand stop,
Mm-hmm.
having them do more of that freshman year. And then by sophomore year, we're still doing a lot of that. But if I have a student who's ready to do the embouchure change or spend 3 weeks just working on their sound and they're ready to do that, I am willing to deviate from the plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
in senior year, I don't lay out nearly as much.
Yeah,
As,
well, and that's I think that's great advice for everyone who wants to go into this is yes, be detailed, yes, be thorough, yes, be organized, but then be flexible.
yeah, all of the above.
Yeah, yeah. No, and so you probably know this, but I remember years ago hearing just that, and I experienced this for myself, hearing you and many of your students perform at all different kinds of things. You just have this knack for playing with such a beautiful sound, and then your students have this thread of they just all sound just really really great. Do you have a certain approach to teaching tone quality, or are there things not, and you don't have to give away your secrets if you don't want to, but I'm personally interested in that because it is noticeable with students who have studied with you, just this concept of tone.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's a very high compliment. um, I teach sound in part maybe through modeling, but we talk about air like all teachers do.
Hmm.
But I also talk about tongue position. I've been talking about tongue position since before that came back in fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the was it Marvin Howe book? No, the Pot Egg books. In the beginning Pot Egg books,
Mm.
they talked about tea-ta-toe. I
Mm-hmm.
think those books. And at some point, I went and did some research, and almost none of the horn pedagogy talked about vowel shape.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about vowel shape in their tone lessons.
Mm-hmm.
That might be the difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now it's all backed up by this real-time MRI stuff. It actually shows you, look how much the tongue is moving. Look at the arch and, all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Are there particular, studies or lyrical etudes that you like to assign just to have students focus on their tone quality?
We do what my students have dubbed Stebletones.
Okay.
So I have these I've called them relaxation long tones,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just long tones. It's Remington, except you come back to the note,
Mm-hmm.
and you can do them with a major scale on the top or a chromatic scale on the top. You can
Mm-hmm.
do any minor scale on the top,
Mm-hmm.
whatever configuration you want. But you just go through the slurs in long tones. But while you're doing it, you're aiming to achieve your best sound and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about vowel shape, and you're thinking about keeping your air present as you change notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the problems is when people are slurring, they back away with their air.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember teachers always saying, blow through the slur, but I didn't know what that meant.
Right. It's hard to get them to understand what exactly that means. Yeah.
Right. So the Stebletones they're also about relaxation, about
Mm-hmm.
taking a full breath and then sighing through the horn in
Mm-hmm.
such a bit of Arnold Jacobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first thing that we do when students get here. The first thing every semester we go through Stebletones. We used to do a lot of them in morning fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Now I leave the fundamentals classes. The majority of them my grad students and upperclassmen are doing, and I do them at the beginning and end of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to be all me all the time with
Mm-hmm.
fundamentals. And my warm up for 25 years started with relaxation long tones.
Mm-hmm.
So
Have you ever
that's
thought? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, have you ever thought about publishing any of those, or making them available outside of your teaching studio?
yeah. I mean it's more about the concept of how you play it than the note.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I was encouraged years ago to write a book
Mm-hmm.
about this, and I started it, but in true fashion of work-life balance, it hasn't been finished.
Well, sign me up for a copy as soon as it as soon as it comes out. But
It will do.
um, so let's thank you again for speaking with me today and giving up some of your relaxation time. I know you're between rehearsals right now, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about your involvement with the International Horn Society. Its importance in your career, and maybe some encouragement for those out there who maybe haven't joined yet. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like if you're a horn player, you should really be in the IHS, but maybe it would be good for people to hear from you about it.
Well, I joined the IHS in the ninth grade.
Oh wow.
I think the summer before ninth grade,
Mm-hmm.
I joined, and I went to my first horn workshop. Yeah, it would have been summer after eighth grade that I went
Mm-hmm.
to my first horn workshop. And the magazines, the horn call, a lot of the articles were way over my head at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't getting much out of the horn call, but going to the conference was life changing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing that much really fine playing, watching the master classes, going and trying instruments, and there are just yards and yards and
Exactly.
of exhibits, and being able to actually speak with these professionals. They were human beings who would actually talk to you in the lobby or in the
Mm-hmm.
hallway. Back then, even the guest artists would eat in the cafeteria. Everybody would eat in the cafeteria together.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a lot of conversations with those professionals. So that to me was worth the price of admission.
Mm-hmm.
And then later I grew into the horn call and the articles and not just the comics in the end. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I mean, just so many back issues of the Horn Call that almost anything you have a question about, there's probably an article that's been written. And now that it's all been digitized, we can go in and easily refer to those articles. And so the price of admission for the Horn Society, I mean, you get to go to the conferences for what, $25 less.
Mm-hmm.
You get the Horn Call, and you have access to the back pages, the member pages where there are recordings and such on the website. But the true price of admission, I think what you're paying for is the fact that we have a society, that we have a fraternity, as you will, of horn players who are lifelong committed friends to the cause, to each other. Going to the conferences, you make lifelong friends, and you realize that everyone around the world is doing this. And having the society coalesces people, and the society can't exist without people joining it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think the number one benefit is community. And then, yes, you get all these other things, but I think community is the real reason to join.
Yeah, and it's, yes, there's the price of membership, and yes, X goes to scholarships and different programs and things, but yeah, the price, it's hard to, you can't really put a price on feeling a sense of belonging with people that are doing similar things to you, and feeling like you have a bond with people that are, thousands of miles away. So that, yeah, the longer I've been in the IHS, the more that's come to mean a lot to me. And it's, the interesting thing is, nowadays where, you have various social media groups and the internet and all of this stuff, there's no shortage of information. Some of it's great, some of it's not very good at all, and very, very suspect, I would say, if you just get playing advice from somebody on the internet. But
that says that the horn weighs 25 pounds, and I've never seen that horn.
Right. Yeah. What's it made out of? Yeah. But yeah, I think that, the IHS curates a lot of that. If it's coming from the IHS, it's good information. It's information that's gone through the process of being vetted, and it's not just somebody just kind of saying whatever they feel like. At least that's kind of my interpretation of it.
100%, especially being a professor at a research university. Our students, when they are doing research, the Horn Call is a great place for them to go because, as you say, it's vetted information.
Oh, and I think this would be a great sort of wrapping up way to tail off the interviews, to talk about your recent work. You're the editor of our Teacher Talk column. Could you talk a little bit about what your work on that has been like, and then maybe talk a little bit about like some past articles? And we've got one, I'm not exactly sure when this interview is going to come out, but you said you had a really interesting one lined up for the February 2024 issue. Maybe give us a little bit of a preview of that.
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. The editing of the column, the hardest part for me has been, truthfully, just getting people to actually submit their articles. People say, oh, I have this article idea. Yes, I want to do it. And then if I don't get it, I can't edit it and we can't submit it.
Yeah.
So this is a plea for people to actually send in your articles. If you have an idea. Yeah. So the new article that's coming down the pike it has a lot of information about practicing, and gosh, I haven't read it now for a couple of weeks. It's I don't know how much to give away.
What's up to you? Who's the author of this particular?
James Wilson. And he is a former Clevenger student. And he and I taught together actually for a year at FSU. And in this article, he shares lots of really interesting and cool ideas. Like one of them is putting the metronome on triplets when you're practicing Mozart. It's a way to help you to elongate those sixteenths that we all tend to rush. And he speaks in the article. It's not written the way you would write a dissertation. It's very much, when I started reading it, I heard his voice in my head. it sounds like him. And that's one of the challenges as an editor that I find is how to edit something without removing the author's voice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So used to editing treatises and, doctoral academic papers,
Mm-hmm.
the editing and keeping somebody's voice where maybe the grammar isn't quite right, but it's a turn of phrase that we all use.
Mm-hmm. Or more conversational rather than like, lecturing or that sort of thing.
Yep. Yep.
No, yeah, exactly. I'm right there with you. We do the same thing. And your articles, when they come in, are always so well edited, so we don't really have to do much at all to get them ready for publication. So thank you for that, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to do it.
Well, I sympathize 100% with your where you said, you just need people to send things in, and that goes for the horn call as a whole. We're doing fine on content, but there's, people have so much information out there and so many different experiences individually that we want to try to give everybody a voice. And I think that's the thing about I'm very encouraged and excited about where the IHS is right now and what they're trying to do just to bring together even more people, not just in the United States, try to branch out overseas. And it's not just about college teachers. It's not just about professional players. There's room for people who don't eat, sleep, and breathe the horn 24 hours a day. There's room for people who do it for fun on the side.
Yeah. I think the direction that the whole society has gone in, as well as the horn call, is very positive, bringing communities together. And yeah, I do encourage people, if they have my article, or my column is called Teacher Talk. So obviously there's an educational slant, but feel free to submit if it's in another language. That's okay. We'll work that out.
Yeah. We can find somebody to translate. We can, if there's room, we really like to publish the translation and the original language. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it the brass bulletin or one of those brass journals? They used to do that where they would publish articles side by side, and the horn call has done that too in the past. And it's paper is expensive these days, but if it's a good article, we'll make every attempt to do both the original language and the translation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, well, Michelle, thank you so much for speaking with me today. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I wish we could talk more.
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate your work. Wow, for the entire horn community, for the horn call, the editing that you do, for this podcast, for your constant support of all of your colleagues. I don't mean just your peers at your institution, but throughout the world. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.